Alright, this video I'm going to speak about how forms, or katas in Japanese, make the martial artist. And without the katas, without the forms, pretty much to round it all up, you're not really a martial artist. You know, you might be something else. And I got a lot to say about this. I'm going to go deep into it. And first off, the reason why I'm using katas, I normally don't like to use like Japanese terminology because I'm trying to promote the Chinese martial arts, but that's the only well-known terminology as far as referring to set patterns of movements in the martial arts. Everybody knows, everybody knows what katas are, but I don't even know what the Chinese terminology is. That's how unknown it is, which is sad. But it's kind of like meditation. Like, there's an English way of saying it, meditation, and then there's a Japanese way of saying it, Zen, which everybody knows Zen. And the Chinese way, nobody ever really uses that terminology, which is Chan, and so I'm using the Japanese terminology basically to relate to the people out there what I'm talking about. Alright, so forms, katas, basically set patterns in the martial arts. Basically like practicing something that's pretty much permanent. Like, you create this way, this pattern, like this routine. It's like a routine where it's the same thing over and over and over again, and then you practice it, and then your training partner and your students and the whole school practices these forms. They call them katas, where basically a set routine that everybody learns. And this is known in the traditional martial arts. In the combat sport, they don't do this. In boxing, they don't do it. Wrestling, they don't do it. Cage fighting, they don't do it. Kickboxing, Muay Thai, they don't do this stuff. This is specifically for like the traditional martial arts that would do things like this, where they would create these katas, these forms. Now, I've been studying Bruce Lee for probably about 15 years, maybe since the age of 19. I've been studying his writings and his movies, and I always try to analyze, his ideas and his philosophies and his thoughts, and these things take time to understand, and you could go decades, to truly grasp the understanding of it. But, at this point in my life, at the age of 34, I see it differently. I feel that I've come upon like a significant revelation about these forms and katas, of which can help the martial artists out there more deeply understand the perspective of Bruce, and also of the perspective of the traditional, and bridging the two together in order to have a holistic understanding. But at the age of 19, I clearly didn't have this understanding, because this is my first time being exposed to his teachings. So basically, being first time exposed to his teachings, when I first started the martial arts, I would practice these forms, these katas, within my martial arts school. They taught me about 3 of them, for the Chole foot system. And I would practice these forms, these katas, and these forms really did help me improve a lot when I look back at it. It really helped me, develop the foundation of the martial arts, of which, enabled me to get to the point to where I'm at now. So, but without even realizing it, until you look back in hindsight, you see how effective these katas and these forms are. But from the outside perspective, you don't gain that understanding. You just look at it and you're like, it's worthless, it's pointless, it doesn't work. Kind of like what Bruce Lee would say, in his books. Bruce Lee really taught down on these forms and these katas, and he would call it like a classical mess, and he'd say basically it's just useless. It doesn't work. You're wasting your time. You need to work on things. You need to train in things that actually work, that are practical, and in real life sparring that are spontaneous. Bruce Lee was all about being spontaneous. And when you read Bruce Lee's teachings, it's hard not to get sucked into that and basically start just following him. And you don't necessarily come upon that revelation on your own. You pretty much just see his teachings. You're like, you know what he says makes sense. Let me just do what he says. And then you're pretty much just following him. So you end up having traditional teachers that teach these katas and forms, and then you encounter somebody like Bruce Lee in his teachings, and he draws you away from that. And clearly I've been drawn away from it for many, many years. As soon as I came upon Bruce Lee's teachings, I pretty much stopped practicing the katas and forms as far as from my old school. But at the same time, it was a breaking point from that school, because I went into college and I couldn't train at that school anymore. And then I ended up creating my own martial arts club. So it's basically like a new beginning for me, not just with stopping the practice of those forms and katas and basically separated from that school, but just creating my own school or my own martial arts club, and then trying to find my own path. And then also reading Bruce Lee's teachings got me to become like find myself in the martial arts, and his teachings came in at the right moment for me to discover myself in which to figure out my own way. Okay, so all these years passed by. I don't practice katas and forms, none of that. But now, at the age of 34, I own a school, a martial arts school. I'm running it, and I've been running it, like a real school, not just teaching somebody out of the basement or the garage, but like a real commercial school that's open to the public, where I'm trying to locate the right students for the school. It's probably been for about 5 years. So at this point in my life, I can start to see the importance of these katas and forms as far as like teaching what you know to the next person. Because you got to understand, Bruce Lee was a great martial artist, but when it came to teaching people to get to his level or above, he was an amateur. He didn't teach anybody to get to his level or above. All he did was express himself as an artist. And some can say that that is much easier than teaching somebody to try to get to your level or above. So it's like that is one thing where forms and katas come into play, is they are teaching tools to help you teach the student to get to where you're at. But if you don't care to teach anybody to get to where you're at, then it may not be necessary. It's almost like somebody who gets to a certain level and is like, you know what, I don't want any students. I don't care to have any. I'm just my own, and my teachings will just die with me, and I don't need any. I don't care to teach anybody to get to my level. And Bruce Lee, I know he saw the frustrations involved with running a school and trying to teach people to get to where you're at. It's like it demands so much patience that he didn't have it. He just like, you know what, this is just, it's taking too long, and it's just not going to the direction that I want. I need to do something else. So he goes into acting, shuts down all his schools. Then he's no longer like, his occupation, his profession is no longer geared towards focusing on the student and trying to help them progress to get to where he's at, but it's more upon focus on himself and expressing himself as an artist to the world. Okay, so at that moment, it even becomes more relevant specifically for his life, that forms and katas are just not relevant, okay, for his practice. So what ends up becoming relevant for him is becoming an actor, right? So now he needs to memorize like lines for the movies. Like there's a lot of, to be an actor demands a lot of memory. So you need intelligence. So rather than remembering forms and set katas and patterns, he would remember lines for acting. Okay, this is another thing. Of course, somebody like Bruce Lee, who's a innovator, entrepreneur, a creator, an artist, he's not going to be able to promote somebody else's style, somebody else's ways, somebody else's forms and katas for too long, because it's in him to be an innovator, a leader, his own, being the one that's in control. So of course he's going to think that it's useless because he didn't create it. None of the Wing Chun forms he created. He's just mimicking and following somebody else's patterns and set ways. But when he creates the forms and he creates the katas, then there's nothing to speak about because he's the one who created it. Okay? It's like it's like the Tao. It's like saying, those who speak do not know. Those who know do not speak. And then Bruce Lee speaks, but it doesn't mean he doesn't know. It's just that he's forced to speak, because if nobody's speaking, or if everybody's speaking when they shouldn't be speaking, then the wise person is put in a position where even though he shouldn't be speaking, he ends up speaking because that situation demands that, for him to speak. So even though he sees a lot of flaws in the forms and katas, he would still have to create a form and a kata in order to teach the martial arts according to his way, even though there's limitations to it inevitably. So basically, of course he's going to speak down on classical forms and katas because he didn't create it. But if he creates it, then it's okay, because he created it. So he's going to fix the problems of what he sees in the old expression from somebody else, and then create his own to resolve those problems. So basically, Bruce Lee stopped his schools. He closed down his schools. He stopped teaching at the moment. He went into acting. So he needed a lot of intelligence in order to memorize all the lines. But then he was also the creator of all the choreographed fights in all his movies. It's not like today, nowadays, where actors are hired and you got a fight choreographer that's creating the fight scenes, where the fight choreographer becomes like the forms. It's like the kata person, and then you just become a puppet to follow their method. And that's pretty much like Bruce Lee following Wing Chun's method and then being unsatisfied with it because it wasn't true to himself and true to his understanding. So then in his movies, he created his own choreographed fight scenes, and he was okay with that, but he was a perfectionist. Every single fight scene, they had to do it over and over and over again until they got it perfect, exactly the way that he wanted it, because he was a perfectionist when it came to that. And basically, his movies became the form and kata. It became the modernized form and kata, where it's filmed. And when it's filmed, that's as permanent as it gets, because you could teach to somebody and then they're gonna forget, and whatever they forget is not gonna be the same way that you taught them. But when you film something like a fight scene, that is set and it's never gonna change. It's gonna stay that way. So every single movie that Bruce Lee created, it remains the same today as it did 50 years ago when he created it. So that became the set form and kata. But the problem is that it got exposed to the entire public. And then people watch it and then they think that, oh, since I watched this, now I know it. But that's not that. But that becomes the issue. The people that, just because people watch Bruce Lee's movies, it does not mean that they're his students. It does not mean that they're his disciples. It does not mean that they're qualified and certified to teach what he had to teach. So basically, he put the movies out there. He had all the fight scenes out there, very entertaining, but still it did not fulfill the aspect of who is qualified to pass on his art, because everybody just becomes an audience that's just watching. But people are not practicing what he had to share. And even if they were practicing, it doesn't mean that they were practicing it the way that they're supposed to practice it in order to be qualified to pass on a part of his art in the way of which he's satisfied with. Okay, so basically, if you turn it back to, if Bruce Lee never went into acting and he just remained a teacher, he would be forced to create forms and katas of his own in order to teach his methods to the public, in which to pretty much locate and certify the right students and disciples to pass on a part of his art. Okay, when a person does not practice forms and katas, there's no set patterns, no nothing, then in my eyes they cease to be a martial artist. You know, because they either have to be practicing in a school or with another person that created these forms and katas, where there's an agreement where he wants to help promote that system because he believes in that system, and that system is an extension of his own ideas, and then he wants to promote that. So then that's what people, you know, that practice Wing Chun or whatever style, they want to promote that system. But if they're unhappy with that system, then they end up having to create their own forms and katas, and then gather up the loyal disciples or students that are willing and qualified to learn these techniques in order to spread the art, you know. And if you're just a single individual and you don't care to teach anybody, then there really is no need to create any forms or katas, because you don't care to teach anybody. But of course Bruce Lee wanted to teach, but he had so many other things going on at the same time that he tried to do everything, but he ended up getting hurting his lower back, and he took a lot of time to write. And during the time that he wrote, it was not organized. All his thoughts were just everywhere, and he just write notes about everything, and you see him drawing pictures showing all these different techniques. Essentially, he was teaching through his writings. It's just that it wasn't organized. Everything was just everywhere. Somebody had to organize all the ideas and present the information or the knowledge, and that was John Little, who compiled everything and organized it in order for us to get somewhat of a grasp of his ideas and thoughts in which to learn from him. But because his mind was just everywhere, it was not organized in which to truly be a valuable tool for the masses to learn his art. If anything, because it's so disorganized, it requires so much experience and wisdom from the reader that a very small percentage of the population will truly understand his teachings, in which to carry on his legacy in a way, you know. But forms and katas essentially is like memorizing every single thing in all of Bruce Lee's books, word for word, every single technique, memorizing all the fight scenes that he did in the movies, like just every single movement. That's kind of like what a form and kata is, where you don't film it, but you do it. You don't just watch somebody practicing a form. You're doing it, and you're doing it repetitively, thousands and thousands of times throughout your lifetime in order to perfect it. And that's essentially what makes the difference between a martial artist and just like a combat sport person. You know, like a combat sport person is just somebody who just practices, you know, more for himself. Like a boxer, he's just practicing the jab and the cross like thousands and thousands of times, and it's just that. There's no it's no complexity. There's no like it's very simple and basic, you know, and it's just kind of repetitive movement like running or jump roping. So when it comes to that, anybody could do it. Anybody could do push-ups, anybody could do pull-ups, anybody could punch a heavy bag, anybody could jump rope. But not everybody, very few people will be able to memorize every single thing in Bruce Lee's books, memorize all his movies, all the techniques, and know it to the T, not just knowing it, but being able to physically express it as well. That is a completely different, whole nother level. You know, I liken it to, you know, people that I've know and heard about who actually would memorize the entire Quran, like they just know it. You know, it's kind of like that, where when you enter in a martial arts school and you got a person that creates these forms and these katas, you know, it's testing you. Can you remember this? Can you perform this the way that is meant to be performed? And if you cannot, then that means for this specific aspect in the art, you are not qualified to pass it on because you don't have it. You know, it's just like somebody, millions of people could watch Bruce Lee's movies. Okay, they saw the movie, but it doesn't mean that they know the techniques that are expressed in that movie. But if they train with Bruce Lee, even if they train with him, it still doesn't mean that they know it. They actually have to demonstrate it, and they need to be approved by Bruce Lee himself that, hey, you know, he's got this form down, this kata down, so he's qualified to pass this part of my art to the next person. You know, now that is essentially what makes the difference. You know, like, you know, anybody could watch Bruce Lee's movies. You could go to the store, buy the movie right now. You could download it on the internet. You could watch it on YouTube. But very, very few people have actually met Bruce Lee face to face. But if you meet him face to face, it doesn't mean that his techniques just transfer onto you like magic. No, you met him face to face, but it doesn't mean that you're qualified to teach what he had to share. Okay, you meet him, and then you get his autograph. Okay, very few people have his autograph, but still, that still does not mean that you're qualified to teach the techniques that he was expressing. Now you got somebody that trains with him, and then he knows the forms and katas of what he was teaching. They're able to demonstrate it, and they're approved by Bruce Lee that they know it. Then becomes the person who is actually qualified to pass on a part of Bruce Lee's art in that respect. Okay, so that is essentially what these forms and katas are for. It's pretty much, out of all the people that are training, out of however many students, no matter if it's 10 students, 100 students, 1,000 students, 1,000,000 students, out of all these people, who are the ones who have these forms and katas down to where they need to be in order to be properly passed on to the next student, you know, in a purified form, uncorrupted. And very few people will be able to meet up to that standard. Now, there could be millions of people that watch the movie, but that doesn't mean anything. So basically, forms and katas are meant to be expressed. They're meant to be practiced and perfected. All these techniques are based, it becomes like your mental book, your mental encyclopedia for all the techniques of which you feel are most practical and relevant for the combative situation. And rather than writing it down on paper, rather than filming it, it's a physical expression, and then it's a mental expression to see if your mind, if your mind could remember all this in this set pattern. And then that becomes the transmission. Because You could write down all the techniques in a book and then you hand the book over to somebody, but it doesn't mean that they actually know these techniques. Because that's another thing. Just because you read Bruce Lee's books, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden, okay, you have it now. No, the forms and katas become the physical expression of it. So, like Bruce Lee, for example, when he was went to those tournaments to demonstrate, he did the 1-inch punch, he did the 2-finger push-up, for example, as a demo. Now there's going to be some people, very few people in this world, that could do it exactly the way that he did it, and then present that, and people would be like, wow, you could do what Bruce Lee was able to do. But that's just a small aspect. But imagine just everything put together: the fitness, the physique, the techniques, the philosophy, the wisdom, the meditation, like everything all in one. And very few people will be able to have all that in one. There's going to be people that have this part, somebody else has that part, another person has that part. So there could be one student that really gets the meditation, the understanding of that. Another student that really gets the forms and techniques down, the katas. Another student that gets the fitness. And then they all come together as disciples to bring together those teachings, to present it to the public. To be like, this is what Bruce taught me, and we're going to help you get to his level through what he taught us. And essentially, everything happened so quickly, he didn't really have any students that were representing for him. Not even his own son was old enough. His wife wasn't into it enough to his level. So what ended up happening was just his writings and his movies, but there's no physical living human being that was able to really get those teachings to carry it on to the next generation. But without Hollywood, without going into acting, a martial art teacher, if Bruce Lee didn't go into acting, he just remained a martial art teacher, he would have to figure out how to properly develop the student to pass on his teachings the right way. And you cannot do it without developing these forms and katas. Like, you may not agree to the forms and katas of whatever school that you practice in. So if you do not agree, then you need to create your own. You need to create your own that's better. And then when you create your own that's better, now you got to locate the students that actually will practice your way and promote your way. Because without them, then your school cannot grow. How can you be a teacher if you have nobody to teach? So you're either a person that's following somebody's forms and katas that were created by them, or you create your own. And if you don't create your own, then it's like a Lao Tzu that never wrote the Tao Te Ching. Like, how is anybody going to benefit from that wisdom? It's like a Bruce Lee that never created any movies. How are we ever going to even learn or even know about who Bruce Lee is if he did not create anything? So it's like a Buddha that decided not to teach. Like, how are all the people who look up to Buddha supposed to learn what he discovered? So basically what I'm saying is that you cannot really be a martial artist if you do not practice these forms and katas. You either have to create it, or you have to practice the way of somebody else of whom you connect with, and then you're promoting it together as one unit. Now if you don't do that, and all you do is just fight, you spar, that's all you do, you play basketball, you punch the punching bag, and you kick and whatever, then you're just, you could be a fighter, or you could just be somebody, you could be an artist. You could still be an artist. But once again, even if you film yourself doing it, what ends up happening is that you're not teaching anybody to get to your level. You're just basically expressing it. And then people are trying to mimic it. But then nobody really has it. You're not really developing any real students that are capable of passing on what you had to share. You just become an entertainer in a way. It's like there's a lot of great people out there, a Bruce Lee, a Michael Jordan, a Muhammad Ali, but none of these individuals really taught anybody to get to their level. They were just doing their thing, and then other people got inspired out of their own energy to get to a certain level, and then they might give some credit to this person that they were inspired by. And that's the route that a lot of artists take. But without getting into that industry, if you can't get into Hollywood, or you don't get into Hollywood, or you don't even care to go to Hollywood, or if you're a boxer and you're not a professional boxer that's in the on TV and everything, then, and you go the route of teaching, then you need to find a way, a method, the best method possible to pass on a part of your art to the student or disciple in the least corrupted way possible. So you got to develop teaching methods that are effective. And that is what these forms and katas are for. And if you don't practice it, then you could be the type of person where you're training yourself to try to get prepared to get to that level. Like, you don't feel that you're ready to teach just yet. And you might die before you even do feel that you're ready. But when you are ready to teach, you will be forced to develop your own methods and how to pass on this part of your art to the next disciple. So every single martial artist that gets to a high level will need to practice the forms and katas. And all beginners that are learning the martial arts will have to practice it as well. Because once you join a martial arts school, you're going to learn it. And then you can either decide to stay with it and keep promoting it for your whole life, or you could break away, find yourself, and then when you do find yourself, then you could start creating your own and teaching your own and having others learn from your method. Or you could break away and just try to find yourself, and you don't find yourself until you die, or you never feel that you're ready to teach, and then you just die. And then that's like a Bruce Lee with no books, no movies, and he's just dead. You could try to put it in writing, you could try to put it in video, but there's no regulation there. The video is not going to speak back to the student and be like, you know what, you're not practicing it right, you're doing it wrong, you got to do it this way. No. People think, once you put things in writing, once you put things in video, people think, oh, I have it now because I own this book. Oh, I have it now because I watched this movie, so now I'm qualified. No. That's why a lot of times it's best not to put it on video. It's best not to put it in writing, because it's not about just owning that source of media. It's not that at all. It's about, can you actually do it? Does your mind actually remember it? Not just for this moment, but through the test of time, through the many years that passed by, do you still have it? This is the foundation of the methods of this school in order to help the disciple get to this level. It's not the end all be all, but this is the foundational method of this school of teaching the beginner to become where Bruce left off. So from this point in my life, I really do see so much importance in these forms and katas, because people don't even have to know me, never even meet me before, but they could get fit just like me. They could do push-ups, they could do pull-ups, they could do bench press, they could do barbell squats, they could get strong, they could get flexible. They could read all the Eastern philosophy books that I read, but they cannot know the forms that I have created, especially if I don't even videotape them. Like, they actually have to practice it with me, and then I have to assess whether or not they have it down to where it needs to be. And that's the big difference between like this martial arts school and just like a boxing club. Learn how to spar. People could come into the door being really good at sparring. People could come in through the door being very flexible, very strong, a lot of cardio, well read in a lot of Eastern philosophy, but people cannot come through that door knowing the forms and the techniques of the school in this specific pattern and way. And that becomes a symbol of the special connection between the master, the Sifu, and the disciple. That becomes the symbol. And without that, then it's like, well, who is truly qualified? Just because everybody watches a video doesn't mean that they really understand. And it's not just about the technique, but it's also about the meditation. You got to interact with the master, the Sifu, on a consistent basis in order for them to assess whether or not you're on the same spiritual level of understanding that they are. Without that constant interaction, then there's no connection to the source of where you are at the level of understanding that has been approved by the Sifu or the master in order to pass it on to the next person in a pure way without the corruption. So, practicing martial arts and getting to a high level is one thing, but to teach somebody to get to where you're at is a whole nother thing. And that is one of the greatest challenges that any martial artist can ever experience.